Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dylan Sines, and I'm a Cyber Threat Intelligence Fellow at the Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy. I also recently graduated from FIU with a degree in psychology and a minor in cybersecurity. My research focused on how China Unicom, one of Beijing's largest telecommunications providers, is being used to conduct cyber espionage on the US and its allies. The next panel will talk about environmental security. This panel will explore the intersection of climate change and security, focusing on how resource scarcity, such as food, water, and arable land, can drive conflict and regional instability. Panelists will discuss the growing need for disaster resilience, highlighting how climate-driven migration, extreme weather events, and infrastructure failures pose complex security challenges. It's my pleasure to introduce Marilyn Critchlow, Water Resources Consultant, Hydrologist, and former General Manager, Hugo Rodriguez Mantilla, Regional Manager at Gran Santander, Colombia, and Andrea Crosta, Executive Director at Earth League International. This plenary session will be moderated by Wazim Maula, Associate Director from Atlantic Council. Thank you and enjoy the panel.
I get in Spanish on my thing.
Okay.
But I have to remember it in English.
Come, Tuya?
No, I am here.
Ah, no.
You
Okay.
told me.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to FIU for organizing not just this conversation, but the entire conference. I'd like to start off by saying I'm a proud FIU alum. I've attended this conference when I was in grad school, so it's also great to be on the other side, and FIU does such a great time each time of these conferences. I believe this is the 10th year, so a monumental year. As you just heard, we have a group of esteemed and distinguished panelists with us today for a very important and critical topic. We're here to answer a very important question. How are changing weather patterns, natural disasters, and other environmental changes driving security concerns across the Americas? You know, it's being here in Miami, it's dawned on me that, hurricane season is less than a month away, which means that the adverse impacts of hurricanes and strong tropical storms and other weather effects are going to be in the news. But what's also happening, and we're seeing this across the Americas, is a rise in security concerns and security challenges, not just for governments, not just for businesses, but for people and livelihoods as well. As we think about the two sides of the equation, one on the climate side, one on the security side, we're living in a more volatile and violent hemisphere. Volatility given from some of the climate impacts, right? Flash flooding, rising sea levels, rising temperatures, et cetera. And then the violent side, just in the Caribbean recently over the past few years, homicide rates have spiked. The Caribbean is now the most violent region in the Americas, which is also a region that is affected by climate change. So as I mentioned, we have a group of distinguished panelists with us today to kind of unpack these conversations, but not just to talk about the challenges, but also to try to talk about what are the policy solutions, and equally as important, who are the partners and allies that countries in the region should work with to advance these solutions. So to get us started, I want to begin first with Marilyn on the climate side of things. How are some of these weather pattern changes, natural disasters, impacting countries across the Americas? And then also thinking about what might be some of those consequences, just to kind of give us a good lay of the land.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, as a result of climate change and natural disasters, the countries of the Caribbean experience increased variability and extremes in rainfall patterns, longer dry seasons, and more intense wet seasons. Higher temperatures, drought, sea level rise, storms, floods, and intense hurricanes. As a consequence, there are a number of impacts. And I guess all the issues that were mentioned before clearly points to water. So I will start with the first impact, water stress and insecurity. What we have there is because of droughts, we have reduced fresh water availability, which is caused by the droughts, and also because of saline intrusion into groundwater. And in Trinidad, it's not only in groundwater you have saline intrusion, but because the rivers are basically at sea level at the bottom, you also have saline intrusion upstream in the surface water. Then you have the heavy rainfall events, which damage water infrastructure, leading to service interruptions and contamination. And then you have increased demand on limited water supplies for agriculture and domestic use. So that was the first impact, water stress and insecurity. Then we have environmental degradation. Because of rising sea levels cause coastal erosion, submersions of land, and salinization of fresh aquifers. Now, I also want to say the environmental degradation, although it's caused by climate change, and you have the impacts because of natural disasters also, we cannot lose sight of the fact that it is exacerbated by man-made activities, because we have a responsibility. So another environmental degradation aspect is coral bleaching. Now, in the Caribbean, a lot of the economies depend on tourism. So coral bleaching and ocean acidification threaten fisheries, biodiversity, and marine tourism. And that also impacts on livelihoods. And you have more frequent landslides and floods that alter the habitats. We also have loss of life and livelihoods, because the hurricanes now, it's not only more frequent, but it's the intensity that really creates the big impact. So we have increased frequency and intensity of hurricanes. And if you remember, there was Hurricane Maria that almost totally destroyed Dominica and caused for displacement, and then you have fatalities. And as I mentioned before, we also have the impact on the persons who do fishing, the farmers, and the tourism workers. All these face chronic loss of income. And we could understand when people lose income, that certainly creates another aspect. And what we have now is, should I say, economic disruption. With high cost of damage from hurricanes, floods, and sea level rise, rebuilding after these disasters actually diverts funds that could go for other sectors, like education, like health, and for development of the country as a whole. And as I said before, tourism is a major economic pillar for many of the small islands. And this suffers from infrastructure damage and negative travel perceptions, because once you have this, it means that it deters a number of tourists who would have visited. And another big aspect is agriculture. Agriculture faces severe losses from droughts, from saltwater intrusion, and storm damage, impacting food security and exports. And those in the rural areas also depend on the agriculture for livelihood. Then we have public health threats. Well, of course, with flooding. And then you also have warmer temperatures and stagnant water, which encourages water vector-borne diseases. You have flooding spreads the waterborne diseases, and then you have the heat waves and poor air quality. I just have 3 more, so I will give over. And then we have displacement and social vulnerability. Climate-driven disasters cause temporary and permanent displacement of populations. because when a place is flooded, the persons cannot reside there again, so they have to migrate. You have housing, schools, and also health services are sometimes damaged or inaccessible. So you see the picture painted there, which points to the fact that we really have to do some good management. We have to change our paradigm and do some great management to make a transformation. And then we have governance and institutional stress. That is important because no matter what you do, if the governance is not, should I say, leading as it should be, nothing happens. So you have, but what we have are the governments are often overburdened, and you have limited capacity also. And finally, for me, with this topic is national and regional security risks. Competition over scarce resources, especially water and food, can intensify social tensions. Disasters can overwhelm national security forces because the national security normally has to come out to help in these times of disaster. So it exposes gaps in emergency response. And then we have, because of climate, we have new migration patterns. So you may have people moving from the rural area and going to the already overcrowded urban area. And stress on the public services at that point in time. So that's
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for a great overview of the different challenges given environments and climate and some of their consequences. What I'm hearing from you is that it impacts every facet of daily life, every economic sector, and all of government.
Yeah.
So creates, what I'm hearing is instability, which could be those opportunities for transnational criminal organizations, other criminal actors to take advantage of. And it's a really good lay of the land. Hugo, I want to go to you next. Marilyn gave a really great overview, but we'd love to get your perspective from maybe the Latin America side on what are some of these, some of these changing weather patterns, what are some of those challenges that come with natural disasters and others and their effects on Latin American economies.
Buenas tardes, sí, digamos que coincidimos plenamente con lo que señala nuestra compañera. No obstante, si bien nos parecemos en las circunstancias que, digamos, que rodean nuestros territorios, tenemos particularidades dependiendo de la región donde nos ubicamos. Entonces voy a tomar parte de lo que señalas para graficarlo en nuestra región, en Sudamérica, partiendo sobre todo de la parte norte de Sudamérica, donde coincidimos en la zona andina, Colombia, Venezuela, Perú, Ecuador. Y en nuestra región, si bien todo este tema del cambio climático que en el caso del Caribe pues, se soporta en huracanes principalmente, pero en nuestro caso, por ejemplo, es el fenómeno de la Niña y el fenómeno del Niño, que nos afecta ya sea con sequías o con, digamos, precipitaciones que generan efectos similares y es desastres naturales, pero también cuando hay sequía, afectaciones en los cultivos. Y entonces, cuando hay estos desastres naturales, en la zona de montaña, en la zona andina, por ejemplo, Colombia tiene 50% de los páramos del mundo. Y las especificaciones donde se encuentran estos páramos, pues son a alta montaña. Cuando vienen unas precipitaciones, digamos, superiores, nos generan derrumbes, estos desastres naturales nos generan incomunicaciones, digamos, en la región, y esto, por supuesto, impacta en lo siguiente. Uno, por supuesto que en el suministro de agua, porque nos afecta también los acueductos veredales, los acueductos de zonas urbanas, nos inundan los cultivos también que nos impiden, digamos, tener la producción, digamos, que históricamente se tiene en esta región y que alimenta al resto del país generando un problema grave en el tema de seguridad alimentaria. Pero estas acciones que terminan afectando la región y, por supuesto, la capacidad de respuesta de las instituciones, terminan alimentando una situación que tenemos, por ejemplo, en Colombia, que para nadie es un secreto desde hace 60 años, y es el tema del conflicto. Y entonces, si mezclamos el tema de los páramos, estas zonas donde se produce el agua en Colombia, en los humedales, con zonas de conflicto, y para que ustedes se hagan una idea, el 71% de los municipios del país, de Colombia en el año 2024, de una u otra manera estaban afectados o estaban están involucrados grupos armados organizados o grupos, no podemos decir subversivos, sino grupos armados, ¿cierto? Porque el tema ya ha superado el asunto de ideología y ha pasado por temas de otra naturaleza como la económica, el contrabando, narcotráfico, etcétera. Entonces, genera un círculo vicioso que no podemos decir en el caso de esta región del país que es producto necesariamente de los desastres naturales, sino el círculo vicioso termina alimentando una situación compleja que genera efectos similares a lo que nos señala la compañera, pero con otros tipos de variables. Y es, si queda incomunicado una región donde hay un puente, pues genera anarquías dentro de esa región donde está presentando la situación, y si esas anarquías están siendo cubiertas por grupos que llevan allí tiempo en el territorio, pues impide que, por ejemplo, las corporaciones autónomas regionales, que son las que gestionan el tema del medio ambiente, puedan entrar a hacer labores, digamos, de recuperación, de restauración, etcétera, sumado a que sumen la pobreza a la región que se ve afectada e incomunicada, y esa población tiene dos alternativas: o migrar, que estamos coincidiendo con el tema de la migración, ¿cierto? Pero hay migraciones internas, que es del campo a la ciudad. Entonces esa migración interna que es del campo a la ciudad termina llevando a nuestros jóvenes, a la gente, a las selvas de cemento, donde no están acostumbrados, digamos, a sobrevivir, contribuyendo, y son factores de seguridad, ¿cierto? Urbana. Pero hay otro tipo de migración que también seguramente lo conoce muy bien el auditorio, y es la migración que todos conocemos por zona de frontera, de mucha población migrante, que nos genera un reto importante en términos no solamente de la oferta de servicios, sino también de seguridad, porque hay gente que igual tiene que comer y termina, ocupando un territorio que no estaba preparado para recibirlos, generándonos una circunstancia compleja en términos de seguridad. Entonces, en el caso de Colombia y nuestros alrededores, pues tenemos un tema de seguridad que es estructural, ¿cierto? Y este tema ambiental termina alimentando, digamos, toda esa sopa de ingredientes para que se complique, digamos, la seguridad hídrica en la región de América, sobre todo en la parte norte de Sudamérica. Esa es la experiencia que, digamos, que tenemos, que termina afectando, por supuesto, el tema de seguridad alimentaria, el tema de turismo interno, pero también externo. Colombia tiene dos costas, el Pacífico y el Atlántico, no somos ajenos al tema de las inundaciones y la erosión costera, de manera que el reto importante que tenemos en el país y en la región es multidimensional. Entonces, nosotros hablamos más de esta seguridad multidimensional. Y esa seguridad multidimensional debe abordarse con un concepto de acción unificada que nuestros líderes regionales están adelantando, y es cómo no solamente tratamos temas reactivos, producto de estos desastres naturales, de las consecuencias que nos generan el fenómeno de la niña, el fenómeno del niño, etcétera, las afectaciones del cambio climático, sino cómo generamos estructuralmente condiciones para que el tema de seguridad no se complique con los desastres, pero supongamos que no tenemos situaciones de cambio climático, ¿cómo hacemos que sean nuestras regiones más seguras? Y eso implica un trabajo de acción unificada que parte del análisis de la seguridad desde el punto de vista multidimensional. Ese sería, pues, nuestro aporte a partir de la pregunta que nos señalas.
Thank you, Hugo. I mean, I think where Marilyn kind of gave a overview of the effects of climate change and changing weather patterns. I like the way you kind of talked about it on what the problem looks like. This idea of it being a cycle of risk, essentially, but also a multidimensional crisis. What has evolved, which would probably mean that the policy solutions also have to be multidimensional as well. So as we looked over the effects on the climate side, we've looked at how the problem operates. Andrea, I want to go to you on now the security side of things, specifically on the environmental crime side. What effects do things like illegal logging, deforestation, mining, IUU fishing, things like that, what is happening in the region right now, and how is that having an effect as well?
Yes, so I research environmental security from a transnational organized crime point of view. In fact, the organization that I established more than a decade ago, Earth League International, is the only NGO out there exclusively focused on what we call environmental crime convergence, which is the convergence of environmental crimes, illegal logging, illegal fishing, wildlife trafficking, mining, with other serious crimes, money laundering, human smuggling, human trafficking, sex trafficking, drugs, weapons, and so forth. So we use, just to give you just a little background of how we collect information, we use different methodologies, field investigation, covert and social engineering operations to collect a lot of intelligence from all kinds of sources, including the members of the criminal organizations. So we send our team everywhere from the Amazon region to the US border with Mexico, US, all cities, ports, airports. We work globally, but a lot in the America as well. So my presentations are usually based on what we see and what we hear out there, either personally or through my very capable teams. Of course, climate change, changing weather patterns, disaster, in general, environmental destruction are hitting already very vulnerable communities out there. But what is often missed, in my opinion, is how environmental crimes, illegal logging, fishing, and so forth, directly accelerate those impacts. So the role played in all these by organized crime groups, including Chinese-run organized crime groups that is part of our work in the field. So these crimes, environmental crimes, are part of environmental security, but it's not just environmental security. Very often it's national security, international security. Environmental crime finance these networks, destabilize economies, institutions, and China is playing a very key role. So to explain better how it works out there, let me share a story. We have many of those in more than a decade in the field. So one of our Operation Fake Gold, we launched a few years ago to look into illegal fishing in Mexico, specifically Baja California, trafficking of marine species, and the cooperation between Chinese nationals and some of the cartels. So we were in Mexico City. It took months and months to get the trust of key individuals in Mexico City, Chinese national, who still is a big wildlife trafficker, especially marine products. So we met in this restaurant, and he was alone with our undercover team. We filmed the whole thing. And the conversation started with the trafficking of marine species. So he had 3 tons of shark fin available, timber, jaguar parts, all kind of other marine species, sea cucumbers, and so forth. So the conversation started with that. At a certain point, a second person arrived. He introduced himself as a member of a very well-known Mexican cartel. And the conversation switched to money laundering and moving money. So they all discussed the wildlife trafficker. The Chinese national had a key role in not only helping the cartels to bring back to Mexico the cash in the US, but also move the money around, launder the money, especially using Chinese shadow banking. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Fei chain, so the flying money system, moving around millions of dollars without hitting any financial system, without leaving behind any digital trace. So the conversation switched to that. And then a third person arrived, and he introduced himself as working at the immigration at the Mexican International Airport. And the conversation switched to human smuggling and human trafficking. So this is what crime convergence looks like out there. And it's incredible how the Chinese organized crime, Chinese businessmen, because I would not even define them as criminals, they are into a lot of legit operation, import, export, hotel, restaurants, you name it. But they play a critical role, not only in the destruction of the environment, so environmental security, but also in destabilizing local governments. They have almost infinite corruption power. They can bribe anyone in the country, not only Mexico. And we have similar stories around the world and around Latin America. I will mention later another one. But that's how, these are the players, let's say. Before understanding the damage, I think you have to understand who are the players and who they are and what is the motivation. Motivation is only one, of course, money. But this is what we see in the field.
Thank you, Andrea. And I think Hugo wanted to respond.
Sí.
Yeah, I want to say so.
Sí, justamente es muy interesante la apreciación, porque lo estamos viendo allí en una subregión que nosotros representamos, que es de 2 departamentos, 127 municipios. Entonces vemos esa circunstancia en 2 regiones, Andrea, una en la zona de Páramo, donde tenemos un reto, un desafío importante con respecto al tema de la minería, digamos, irresponsable, si lo permiten la expresión. Pues allí hay unos títulos que no han podido, de empresas grandes, que no han podido desarrollar su labor, pero mientras se contiene, porque estamos dependiendo de licencias ambientales, hay grupos que sí pueden entrar, extraer, usando el mercurio, afectando aguas abajo el agua de cerca de 2 millones de habitantes. Y es una situación que es una advertencia que tenemos ya de grupos que están entrando allí. Nunca hay vacíos de poder. Si no está el Estado, alguien ocupa ese vacío y se facilita, digamos, donde está el dinero, pues es atractivo para que la inversión en armas, para que la inversión en hombres, digamos, hagan atractivo el negocio del tema de la minería, afectándonos la seguridad hídrica. Pero tenemos también otro tema que es el de los oleoductos. Del 2007 al 2024, 1.299 atentados contra los oleoductos nuestros se han generado por estos grupos ilegales. De nuevo, está el tema del dinero, ¿cierto? Pero las consecuencias son para el medio ambiente, por supuesto, porque ese líquido nos contamina las aguas, pero también como una forma de ocupar a las fuerzas del Estado en resolver los problemas, digamos, como consecuencia de estos oleoductos y poder seguir desarrollando pues, sus acciones. Entonces, clarísimo el tema de cómo entender esa seguridad multidimensional, por eso ratificamos nuestra posición, porque es una situación que la tenemos allí y que además es transnacional, no es un asunto local, es un asunto transnacional que invita a que las decisiones también y las soluciones también tienen que tener una visión regional y articulación entre los diferentes países.
Yeah, please, Marilyn, go ahead.
But on a lower scale, in our area, what happens too is that you find the agriculture sector, especially when it's dry season, they, should I say, steal water. So you really, it even gives you the challenge of being able to assess the quantum of water. Then you find that persons who have license downstream of those farmers now don't have the quantum of water that they were licensed for. So you see, it's a different scale. It's not the big money scale, but it is still from that point of view. Although the agricultural sector pays the least amount of money for water abstraction, they still do a lot of the stealing of the water, not wanting to pay for it or to circumvent it. But you see, the bigger problem there is that you, as the manager of the resource, don't have a handle on how much water you actually have. What you realize is when the persons downstream not getting the quantum of water that you expect them to get, you realize that there's water being taken off the system.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think what's become really interesting about this conversation so far is that we tend to think about this intersection of climate and security where it is climate change driving or amplifying security concerns. But what we're also hearing is that it can operate the other way. It could be attacks on oil pipelines, agriculture sector, where crime and transnational criminal organizations can drive environmental concerns as well. So instead of it being a one-way street, it's in fact a two-way conversation that lends to Hugo's point earlier about this really being a multidimensional challenge. Marilyn, I want to stay with you quickly and then go down the line. One is, how we talked about resource scarcity a little bit, but scarcity of food, water, other public goods. You had mentioned public health as an important one. How can that drive conflict, other security concerns?
Well, then you have competing resources. You have sectors competing for a resource that, can't meet their requirements. So what you have, when you have water scarcity, you now have a basic need to creating national tension, should we put it like that? Because when you have prolonged droughts, you have over-extraction of aquifers, you have saltwater intrusion. that leads to unreliable or restricted access to water. And then you have the intersectoral tensions that can arise between agriculture, between tourism, and between domestic use. Of course, that again points to the fact before how the agriculturalists would now want to take water, because no matter what, domestic use must come first. You can't leave people without water. And this emphasizes the fact that when we're looking at environmental, no matter what environmental crisis you have, what is central to that is that water is the bigger crisis. No matter what you're looking at. And this might seem simple, but water is life. None of us here, no plant, no animal, can live without water. That might seem simple, but it is deep. So no matter what we do, what we think about, what else is important, this is most important. What they say? Water is next to oxygen. So from that particular point of view, and then we have food insecurity, as you asked about, undermining stability and livelihoods. So when you have climate impacting local agriculture, and you have a reduction in your food production, and increased costs of food now, because everybody who was accustomed to getting the cheaper one locally now have to buy the imported, that causes, you now have some food insecurity, which undermines national stability by increasing poverty for those who are not, dependent on that, and weakening livelihoods and pressurizing, I guess, governments get the end of it. And then we have energy. Something we talk about and we don't ever mention. Even in the energy sector, you cannot get a drop of oil by secondary oil recovery if you don't have water. We think of it and we look at it and we say, oh, well, yes, this is this is where we get our big money from. But if you don't have water and it is secondary oil recovery that you're using, the methodology you're using, you must have water. So it's just a truth. So then we have energy and public goods scarcity, and what causes that you now have undermining of service delivery. Because in cases where people depend on desalination and pumping, that is energy intensive. And therefore, limited fresh water often translates into energy shortages in that case. So what else could we get from that? Civil unrest and protests, repeated shortages of food and water, especially when perceived as mismanaged, can create public demonstrations, shutdown, and unrest, and therefore, and then create distrust in the government. And again, as I mentioned before, we have migration and displacement. Scarcity driven by internal migration, already overburdened housing, water, and sanitation infrastructures, that creates more stress because you have climate-induced migration. If people cannot get water in a particular area, or you have flooding, you can't live there if every rainy season you are flooded out. You have to move. People don't like to move. You get accustomed to a particular area, and then you may have put all your resources into this house. But circumstances mean that you just have to move. And therefore, that causes a certain amount of tension. And of course, what we have, weakening of the state capacity and national security. As I mentioned before, once we have a lot of stress with respect to water, whether it's too much water, whether it's less water, you usually find national security has to get into into play to help, and therefore their attention is taken away from what they should really be doing. And that creates a, so we have fragile systems, and that creates, if you look at it from the, should I say, the worst case scenario, that vulnerability can lead to organized crime, because when people have less life, when their livelihoods have been taken away from them, and that kind of thing, they look at probably an easy way out. I say easy with inverts. So, well, in the end, is failure to secure water and food is not just a development failure. It becomes a national security threat.
Thank you, Marilyn. A good coverage of the different types of risks that can come from resource scarcity. Hugo, I'd probably want to go to you and maybe get some examples of where you've seen this happen, from your vantage point. And then, Andrea, I'd like to go to you after, because Marilyn mentioned how this creates fragile systems. And given that you do a lot of work with TCOs and understanding how extra-regional actors play a part in crime in the hemisphere, I would ask you after, Hugo, how might they take advantage of those fragile systems to increase challenges to security? But Hugo, please go ahead first.
Grupos armados organizados, ¿te refieres? Sí, las circunstancias que favorecen a estos grupos son el caos. A medida que haya caos, pues ese es el combustible para que puedan, pues, continuar con sus labores, digamos, actuar localmente o ya a nivel, digamos, a nivel internacional, como lo señala Andrea. De manera que es una realidad que tenemos allí. En medida que haya caos, la capacidad institucional se ve afectada. Señalábamos que si hay vacíos de poder, alguien ocupa. Lamentablemente en nuestras regiones siempre hay quien ocupe. Y si hay un atractivo monetario, pues esto termina convirtiéndose en la unión entre el hambre y las ganas de comer, ¿cierto? Se unen y es como si tuviéramos un hotel 5 estrellas para estos grupos, para que adelanten estas acciones, que incluso va mucho más allá porque señalaba Marilyn, por ejemplo, todo el tema de migración. Entonces, y señalaba Andrea, todo el tema de la trata de blancas. Pues en la medida que haya desplazamiento de las personas por las circunstancias que ya se han expuesto acá, pues suceden dos temas. Uno, esas personas pueden ser capturadas para que hagan parte, digamos, de estos grupos, porque necesitan hombres para poder desarrollar sus acciones, y si es alguien que está con hambre, que sus necesidades básicas insatisfechas están complicadas, pues cualquier oportunidad puede llevar a que sus criterios, digamos, éticos desaparezcan y terminen involucrados en estos grupos. Repito, el tema ya no pasa por la ideología, el tema pasa es por los intereses que se generan en un territorio, los intereses que generan ese territorio con lo global. Pero si estas personas deciden salir de la región donde se está generando esta crisis del agua, la crisis de alimentos, pues también son presa fácil, ya sea para que en las selvas de cemento, en las partes urbanas, lleguen a engrosar esos cordones de miseria, y de nuevo allí también hay grupos con otras particularidades, pero también hay grupos que terminan llevándose a estas gentes que hacen parte de estas bandas urbanas con límites invisibles territoriales que generan un gran reto y un desafío a la seguridad ciudadana en lo urbano. Pero por la ubicación geoestratégica que tenemos en la unión entre Sudamérica y Centroamérica, pues es un paso obligado que se ha convertido incluso para llegar a Estados Unidos de población migrante. Algunas migran hacia el sur, hacia Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, ¿cierto? Otras migran aquí hacia Estados Unidos. Entonces, para poder resolver el tema no es solamente con acciones de hecho, sino tenemos que entender dónde se está generando esta crisis y empezar, por eso hablo siempre del tema de la seguridad multidimensional. Cuando hablamos de seguridad multidimensional, no solamente responder con acciones armadas, sino entender cuáles son las necesidades que hay en un territorio y empezar a abordar las necesidades, digamos, básicas y satisfechas, cómo mejoramos las condiciones y calidad de vida de la gente, cómo mejoramos la infraestructura, porque si bien contra la naturaleza no hay ninguna solución, por más de que se inviertan enormes recursos para construir túneles, si la naturaleza puede desbaratar en un segundo cualquier infraestructura, pero en la medida que nosotros disminuyamos el riesgo de conectividad, de comunicación en los territorios, estamos contribuyendo a que esa seguridad multidimensional desde el territorio facilite las condiciones para que el problema no se le extienda a otros países, como en el caso de Centroamérica, donde está migrando toda esta población desde América del Sur, pero usando Centroamérica como paso para llegar a Estados Unidos, por ejemplo. Entonces, fíjense cómo un tema ambiental que replica, ya sea con huracanes en Centroamérica, ¿cierto?, o allá con el fenómeno de la niña y el niño, termina generando todo un círculo que al último termina tomándose una foto de población, de números de migrantes, de números de tratas de blancas, ¿cierto?, de número de muertos, etcétera, y nosotros de pronto nos acostumbramos como instituciones a atacar los síntomas, pero no la causa. La invitación aquí es que así como analizamos las causas para otras situaciones de seguridad, en la seguridad multidimensional, donde está el tema del medio ambiente, también hagamos ese ejercicio de analizar las causas para que esos síntomas se reduzcan y no ataquemos los síntomas para que terminemos de pronto poniendo un velo, un velo ya sea temporal, que resuelva el tema temporal o que simplemente genere una recaída con efectos mucho mayores. Digamos que hemos vivido en Sudamérica, en especial en Colombia, en la región que yo represento, que es la región administrativa de planificación del Gran Santander, compuesto por 2 departamentos, estas circunstancias, por eso hablamos, digamos, con las realidades y es a partir de lo que están señalando nuestros compañeros Marilyn y Andrea, lo estamos viviendo allí y no es una situación local, es una situación que se está viendo seguramente en cada uno de los países con diferencias de pronto en los efectos, pero en última la situación es muy similar porque está conformado estas crisis por 2 elementos iguales, la naturaleza y las personas. Entonces aquí estamos personas. Independientemente del país que estemos, somos personas. Y la naturaleza nos afecta, la naturaleza no entiende de división político-administrativa, no entiende de fronteras políticas. Afecta, como sea, un derrumbe o la afectación que nos sucede en el páramo termina afectando el lago de Maracaibo en Venezuela porque son las cuencas hidrográficas que surten el agua a toda esa región. Entonces, si nos pasa algo en Haití, pues tiene implicaciones, por supuesto, que en República Dominicana. Ese sería, pues, mi complemento a los comentarios que hace Marilyn.
Great overview and giving great examples. As we are coming up on time, I think a few minutes remaining, we'd love to kind of now turn to policy solutions. So, Andrea, definitely want to get your thoughts on how TCOs and other actors can take advantage of some of these fragile systems that can come about from environmental concerns, but then get some final thoughts from Hugo and then Marilyn on some potential policy solutions. But Andrea, please.
Yeah, so climate change and environmental issue, environmental degradation, of course, act as a sort of a threat multipliers in fragile regions. But in my opinion, a region is fragile not only because of environmental issues, but first and foremost, is fragile when the state is absent. When it's lawless, it becomes fragile by definition, and it becomes the perfect ungoverned space where organized crime can only thrive, but also further the destruction. And there are many examples in the Americas and around the world. I can come up with another example. One of our other operation is called Operation Encanto, like the Disney movie. And it's mostly in Colombia, so you would appreciate the story. We've been asked a couple of years ago to look into deforestation and the drivers behind deforestation in that area, also on the border with Brazil and Venezuela. So we deploy our teams, as always. They went everywhere. They spoke with everyone. They are still doing it. And of course, we went through the 3 main drivers. So in some regions, the main driver is cattle ranching, illegal cattle ranching, and the laundering of cattle and meat back into protected areas and national parks under FARC control, and then back out of the protected area and back into the legal system. So the meat that you're going to consume might come from there. And over there, you see a really interesting collaboration between organized crime and ranchers and corrupt government officials and businesses, including international businesses. Again, lawless, fragile. The second driver is cocaine. It's still a thing. And you see how FARC collaborate with Mexican cartels. There is a portion of the Amazon in Colombia, I've been told it's called the Mexican Amazon because it's under control of the cartels. And then another driver in another region is illegal gold mining, mostly along the rivers with those dragones. And over there you see, especially in the south, under control of FARC, but actually some of the machines to do illegal gold mining come from Brazil, so it's actually a PCC operation, and gold is then extracted from Colombia, brought into Brazil, and then in another of our operations, it finds its way all the way, for example, to Suriname, Guyana, where you have banks where you can do things, let's say, easily. But at the same time, you see Chinese investors. We met and we investigate Chinese national in the region who not only are linked to the Fujian mafia, which most of you probably know, they also, of course, have law enforcement in their pockets, and they are really good in discussing business with FARC. So that's a great example of a series of different actors operating in the region, and that's not the place to mention, for example, Iran and Coltan, and there's a lot of other stuff going on at the same time, and they're taking advantage of a fragile region. And in my opinion, this region is fragile because there is no state, there is no law, and that's why it's fragile. And that's a great example of environmental destruction by a series of different actors that are very good in collaborating with each other, unlike us. Very often we have organized crime versus very unorganized response, all of us.
Thank you, Andrea. It was a really good final word. And as we have just a few minutes left, Hugo would like to get a quick word from you on potential policy solution, then Marilyn will end with you with a quick policy solution as well.
Nosotros justamente estamos trabajando primero de abajo hacia arriba en nuestro plan de seguridad hídrica, que de hecho nos apoyará en este ejercicio y es coherente con lo que venimos poniendo organismos internacionales como la OEA y la Universidad Internacional de la Florida. De hecho, tenemos un convenio, un memorando de entendimiento con la Universidad Internacional de la Florida para que nos apoye en toda esta construcción de plan de seguridad hídrica, que además está construida o será construida con actores de la cuádruple hélice regional, donde está el gobierno, cuando hablamos de gobierno aquí hablamos tanto nacional como territorial, está la academia, están los empresarios y está la sociedad civil. Solo de esta manera, incluyéndolos, pero también con conocimiento, nosotros no podemos decir que por el hecho de ser un plan no necesariamente garantiza el éxito, sino parte ya solamente de la planeación, pero también de ejecución. Pero vamos a empezar con este ejercicio, la construcción de plan de seguridad hídrica, que además impacta en varios otros programas que se han venido planteando acá en el marco de un instrumento que en el caso colombiano se llama Plan Estratégico Regional con una vigencia de 12 años. Esto es muy importante decirlo porque los tiempos de nuestros gobernantes son de 4 años territoriales, tanto del presidente como de los territorios. Pero estas estructuras regionales tienen un horizonte de tiempo mayor. Y no puede ser de otra manera porque estamos concentrados en temas regionales que deben superar estos periodos de gobierno, porque la solución, repito, si estamos hablando de que, por ejemplo, el medio ambiente no respeta división político-administrativa, tampoco respeta tiempos de gobernantes. Entonces necesitamos hacer un ejercicio serio, que ya lo iniciamos, que va asociado a una serie también de elementos de lo que señalaba, por ejemplo, Marilyn, que hay un asunto que tiene que pasar por la educación. Entonces hablamos de la educación ambiental, hablamos de un plan regional de restauración de nuestros páramos y de nuestros humedales. Un tema fundamental que quizás no se tocó, que es cómo hacemos también para que las empresas que están en el territorio descarbonicen, no genere tantas emisiones. Entonces, estamos hablando de un plan regional de descarbonización que une a los departamentos. Y esto va de la mano también de cómo monetizamos con bonos de carbono la situación que ya existe, la situación que ya está. No la podemos, digamos, controlar solamente desde el territorio con nuestras empresas, pero a nivel mundial pues siguen habiendo emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero y nosotros tenemos suficiente territorio para que capturan esa contaminación, ese CO2, y estamos trabajando en un plan regional de bonos de carbono que una a las diferentes entidades a los predios públicos de las entidades autónomas que recogen predios y que tienen allí abandonados. La idea es monetizar, pero también a los predios privados. Tenemos un sinnúmero de terratenientes que tienen sus predios allí y lo que estamos tratando es, bueno, ¿cómo hacemos para que esos terrenos que usted tiene allí no los toque? Fortalezcámoslos porque sus árboles nos van a ayudar a capturar ese carbono y podemos monetizarlo. Entonces, es una serie de acciones que ya empezamos a trabajar, nos está acompañando la Universidad Internacional de la Florida, y donde hay un compromiso de los actores locales. A esto le sumo, para terminar, también que el gobierno de Colombia viene trabajando también en este plan de desarrollo que finaliza el próximo año temas muy importantes. Por ejemplo, no solamente trabajar soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, sino un concepto muy importante que seguramente ustedes los tienen en sus países, que es el ordenamiento territorial alrededor del agua. Ese concepto nos ha permitido en los territorios trabajar todo el tema de catastro multipropósito, por ejemplo, y cómo llevar, sobre todo en estas regiones que no han avanzado o tienen desactualizados sus esquemas de ordenamiento territorial, aprovechar esa circunstancia que tenemos allí, que justamente se ha alimentado por esas anarquías que hablaba Andrea, para empezar a organizar el territorio alrededor del agua, de manera que hablamos al principio de problemas. En las soluciones, pues nosotros estamos caminando en ese sentido. Eso motiva porque estamos hoy aquí, justamente porque esperamos que la Universidad de la Florida nos acompañe en este propósito en el cual confiamos vamos a tener resultados positivos.
Thank you very much. I think we have unfortunately run out of time. I know we could have continued this conversation for a whole other hour given the multidimensionality of the crisis. And knowing FIU, this is going to be just a continuation of the conversation. I'm sure there will be more efforts. But once again, I want to thank the panelists, but Marilyn insists, but in our final 30 seconds, please feel free.
Yes, I just wanted to say that a comprehensive approach is needed to address the effects of climate change and natural disasters. And when I'm saying comprehensive, because we are looking at policies, we must incorporate climate resilience and disaster risk and disaster management within national development plans, within all sectoral plans, because that is the only way attention would be given to it. When we're looking at it, we have different areas. You have to look also at the financial actions. And what I must say, Caribbean countries are often under-resourced and over-indebted, limiting the ability to investigate in long-term resilience. But I wouldn't go into that because we don't have much time. So we need to look at the aspects of financial actions. We need to look at the technical actions, and I just want to talk a little bit about the technical actions, because the technical actions, to me, everything has to do with integrated holistic management. And all the aspects must be looked at. We have to look at integrated water resources management. We have to look at integrated coastal zone management. We have to look at integrated watershed management, and in that you cannot manage water without proper land use management. So we must have proper land use management. So those are some of the things that I wanted to talk about. Implementing the coastal, you also have implementing ecosystem-based adaptation, and that is the part to protect and restore your natural buffers, such as your mangroves and your coral reefs, because that is what is going to reduce your coastal erosion and also mitigate storm impacts, because that is what protects your land, actually. So, and the other aspects, of course, you have to deal with your disaster risk reduction. As I said, it should be part of disaster risk reduction and climate change. Resilience must be part of your national planning, must be part of all your sectoral plans and policies, because as we see, water impacts everything. And in the watershed, the rivers are the record cards of the watershed. When I say that, it reflects through quantity and quality all that happens in the watershed. So we need to do, and as we say, we are all stewards of the environment. And so a critical part is that for all these sectors that I talk about, we must have a multi-sectoral approach. We cannot continue to do these things in isolation because it's not addressed in that way. We leave out all the important aspects that need to be looked at, and therefore that aspect of multi-sectoral and collaboration must be there. What else I want to say with that, with respect to it?
Well,
Also, we need a critical part, since we are all stewards, a critical aspect has to be public education and awareness, because we cannot be good stewards if we don't have the knowledge to make proper decisions. And proper decisions are what determines whether we have resilient policies. Because if you don't know, you make a decision based on your limited or lack of knowledge. So those are critical aspects I see that we need to ensure that we have to transform the way we do. So therefore, we need to change governance. We need to look at the governance. We need to do institutional capacity building. That is should I say, a weak link in the whole thing also. So those are some of the points I thought that I should bring out. And one point I want to say is that something I wanted to, let me just get the point. Public education and leadership must be central. And when I talked about public education, I mean public education from the community to the cabinet committees. Because if your leadership don't know, that is one, and I can tell you that we have had in our region where policies have been done and has waited and has taken 2 and 3 years for it to be approved by government. Now, if you realize the importance of this, and if people really know, nobody would do that. So, I really think so. The part why public education and leadership must be central. It must be central because that is what is going to bridge the gap between policy and action and between risk and resilience. So we have to have an educated population on what needs to be done because everybody plays an integral part in the management of the resources. So thank you.
well, thank you, Marilyn, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for a great conversation.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to take maybe a little 5-minute stretching break for the very last breakout session of this conference. Then we're going to have a breakout session where right here is going to be on the Antarctic. Right? We're going to focus on the Antarctic. And then in the East Ballroom is going to be about illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. All right? So again, Antarctic here, and then IUU fishing in the East Ballroom, and then we will reconvene together at 5 p.m. for closing remarks. Thank you.